Hi everyone, hallo zusammen. My name is Ines Martin, and in this German 2 tutorial, I just want to show you really quick what happens with separable and inseparable prefix verbs in the Präteritum. I want to start with a quick review, and I hope that most of you remember separable and inseparable prefix verbs in German, right? This would have been treated in German 1. And I assume that you already know it, but if not, or just as a quick reminder, I'm going to give you a quick summary of what that was like. So I hope you remember that there's some verbs in German that have a prefix like aus in ausgehen, to go out, or ab in abfahren, to leave. Okay? You probably know that if a verb has a separable prefix and you use it in a present tense sentence, you have to separate the prefix from the stem and it moves to the end of the sentence. So the example I gave you here is ausgehen, to go out, and in the present tense you would say ich gehe jetzt aus. So the aus doesn't stay in front of the gehe as you had it in the infinitive, but rather it moves to the end of the sentence. I'm sure you remember this now. Okay. Now, if a verb has an inseparable prefix, and you use it in a present tense sentence, you don't separate the prefix from the stem, right? This is why these are a little bit tricky, because you don't know, does it separate, does it not separate? And if it separates, you also have to remember to separate it. So I always think the inseparable ones are actually easier, because that's just the standard that most students do, is not separating it off. The example sentence I have here was the verb verstehen, to understand. And for example, ich verstehe den Satz, I understand the sentence, and I just see my video cuts off the last word here, but that's just sentence. I'm sure you figured that out. And what's important is you did not separate off that prefix, right? It's together with the stem, ich verstehe den Satz, not ich stehe den Satz fair. Now, I assume that you're watching this video because you just recently learned the Präteritum, and you remembered separable and inseparable prefix verbs, and you wonder how these work in the Präteritum. So let's look at that. The good news is this is super easy. So this is one of the easiest tutorials I actually have to do, because you can basically just follow all the rules from present tense. So if you have them down, you're going to be golden. If you remember, the separable prefix verb that I want to use here is mitbringen, to bring. And in the present tense, you could build a sentence like, Jan bringt seinen Hund oft zur Schule mit. Jan often brings his dog along to school. Okay? Importantly, mitbringen is a separable prefix verb, so mit is separated from the stem, goes all the way to the end of the clause here, and you get Jan bringt seinen Hund oft zur Schule mit. In the Präteritum now, you basically only have to put the bringen part, so the stem, into the Präteritum, and then everything else stays the same. So mit goes all the way to the end of the sentence, but you see everything looks the same. All that changed was bringt to brachte for the Präteritum. Now for inseparable prefix verbs, it's just as easy. You have an inseparable prefix verb like to spend, verbringen, and in the present, you could build a sentence like Jan verbringt den Sommer in Deutschland. Jan spends the summer in Germany. And in the Präteritum, you still leave the prefix in the same position, which is together with the stem for inseparable prefix verbs. But now you just move the bringt part to the Präteritum, so Jan verbrachte den Sommer in Deutschland. Really pretty straightforward, right? Now let's look at prefixes and stems. So just as any other verb in German, verbs with prefixes can also be strong, weak, or mixed. And I know that this is difficult whenever you learn the Präteritum, and this is not a tutorial on weak, strong, and mixed verbs, but I still want to show you a little bit how, if you just have that system down, you already have the system down for separable and inseparable prefix verbs too, because it's really not that hard. Okay? So what you have to know is that a Präteritum of a verb with a prefix is the same as the Präteritum of its base verb. Just make sure that you either move the stem to the end of the clause if it's separable, or you don't move it. Okay? If you look at this table here, and I realize it's cutting that off a little bit, so I hope you can still see that. The table is taken from Sag mal, which is the book you're probably working with if you're watching this video. But if not, I hope you can see the table in this. So what you have to see here or know is these are the bear verbs. So kaufen becomes kaufte in the Präteritum, which is weak, and weak verbs are easy because they just add the te, right? So kaufen becomes kaufte, schauen, schaute, And then whenever you have a prefix with them, like verkaufen, to sell, all you do is keep the prefix in the same position and change the stem too. Okay? Same as anschauen. Anschauen is separable, so now you get schaute an. But importantly, the prefix doesn't change, the grammar doesn't change. All that changes is the stem change that you have to learn for the Präteritum anyways. I know the strong verbs are always a little more difficult than the weak verbs because they don't just add the TE, they have a stem change, and you actually need to know what changes in the stem. So finden becomes fand, sprechen becomes sprach, sehen becomes sah. But again, same thing with separable and inseparable prefixes. They just stay wherever they would in the present tense. So with the stem finden, you have a verb like erfinden, to invent. And then the stays the same. The stem changes from finden to fand, and you get erfand. Besprechen, to discuss, still has the same base sprechen. You just add the BE, and then you keep the BE where it is, and you change the stems to besprach. And this works for separable prefixes too. My computer is doing weird things here, I'm sorry, it just does it on its own, I didn't even touch anything. But importantly here, for Fernsehen, sah fern, you also get the separation. The fern moves all the way to the end, but sehen just becomes sah. Pretty straightforward. And with mixed verbs, it's the same story. Bringen zu brachte, kennen to kannte, mitbringen then becomes brachte mit, verbringen, verbrachte. Okay, here you separated the stem, here you didn't, but importantly, you just changed the stem. I think once you understand the system, it's really the easiest thing. Okay, there's two things I want you to keep in mind. The first one you probably remember from German 1 still is that if you have stress placement in a word that helps, or if you have the stress placement in a word, that helps you to remember or to figure out whether the verb has a separable or an inseparable prefix. So when the stress is placed on the prefix is separable. For example, in anrufen or einschlafen, you have separable prefix verbs. You don't say anrufen or einschlafen. Then they would be inseparable, but anrufen, einschlafen, that stress already tells you, oh, if I use this in a sentence, I have to separate it off. Now, when the stress is placed on the stem, the prefix is inseparable. For example, verkaufen or besuchen, you don't say verkaufen or besuchen. So you see the stress is on the stem here, they are inseparable. So this just helps you to remember to place the prefix at the end of the clause, and that's the same in the Präteritum, right? A second thing to keep in mind is that when you talk about events that happened in the past and you use a modal and a verb with a prefix, you put the modal in the Präteritum. And this is important because whenever the modal is already in the Präteritum, the separable or inseparable prefix verb that you use as the second verb of the sentence always appears in the infinitive form. So you never have to change anything or separate anything. So for example, Ines musste Kekse mitbringen. Ines had to bring cookies. Musste is your modal verb, so she had to. And then mitbringen, even though mitbringen is usually separable, because now you use the infinitive form, because your conjugation is already on the musste, it stays together. So you don't say Ines musste Kekse bringen mit, but Ines musste Kekse mitbringen. And Ines sollte nicht so viele Beispiele erfinden. Ines shouldn't have to come up with so many examples. The sollte is your modal verb, so the erfinden, which is an inseparable verb, also stays the same. Okay, now it's your turn. Und jetzt reden wir Deutsch, weil Sie üben. Schreiben Sie diese 3 Sätze ins Präteritum um. So I'm going to give you 3 sentences that I would like you to reform and say in the Präteritum. Der erste Satz ist, Sven schläft beim Fernsehen immer ein. Sven always falls asleep when he watches TV. Now remember, all you have to change is the schläft, because ein is separable, but that stays the same in the Präteritum. Okay, so you just think about that, how you put schläft in the Präteritum. And if you want to do that by yourself, I would suggest you just pause the video here really quick, and then you click on. Okay, the right solution should have been Sven schlief beim Fernsehen immer ein. Sentence number 2. Familie Martin zieht nach Kalifornien um. Again, all you have to change is the zieht. Because the it would be umziehen, to move, but the stays in the same position because that's how easy it is in the Präteritum. And the correct answer is Familie Martin zog nach Kalifornien because ziehen becomes zog. And one more, meine Tante versteht kein Englisch. Now you have an inseparable prefix, though the ver stays in the same position, but you still have to figure out how to put steht from stehen into the past tense. So, I give you a second. And here's the answer. Meine Tante verstand kein Englisch. Okay, now, one more exercise, and now it gets a little harder. Bilden Sie einen Satz im Präteritum mit diesen Worten. So I want you to build a sentence in the Präteritum with these words that I give you. The first one would be mitbringen. So first you think about, is mitbringen separable or inseparable? Where's the stress? It's on mit, so you get mitbringen, not mitbringen. So mitbringen is a separable verb, or has a separable prefix. So whatever sentence you build, mit has to go all the way to the end. Okay? Take a second to do this. Here's what my solution was. Frau Martin brachte ihren Studenten Süßigkeiten mit. Frau Martin brought sweets or treats for her students. Okay? Bringen becomes brachte, and mit goes all the way to the end of the sentence. How about entdecken, to discover? First, you want to ask, is entdecken separable or not? Is it entdecken or entdecken? It's the second, entdecken, so this is inseparable. So whenever you build a sentence with this in the Präteritum, you don't have to move the end to the end of the sentence. Take a second to do this example. And here's my answer. Sven entdeckte seine Liebe für klassische Musik. Sven noticed or figured out his love for classical music. And one last one, zurückkommen. Is this separable or not? Yes, it is. So take a second to do the sentence. And here's the sentence I came up with. Ines kam aus Deutschland zurück. So zurück, the separable part, moves to the end. Kommen becomes kam. And you have your perfect Präteritum sentence. I hope this cleared up some questions. If you have any questions still, please email your online instructor. This is it for today, and thank you all for listening. Tschüss!